The Élysée Palace had seen revolutions survive, empires collapse, and presidents rise. The Élysée Palace had seen revolutions survive, empires collapse, and presidents rise beneath its gilded ceilings. It had hosted kings from the Middle East, diplomats from Washington, royalty from Britain, and cultural icons whose names were woven into the fabric of history itself. But on that rain-soaked night in Paris, the palace staff whispered about only one guest. Not a monarch, not a billionaire, not a Nobel Prize winner. A 20-year-old tennis player from Manila. And somehow, impossibly, she carried herself with a kind of gravity that made even seasoned political advisors stop and stare when she walked past them. Alex Eala had arrived in Paris expecting pressure. She had not expected destiny. The limousine glided through the city like a shadow, passing glowing cafes and midnight traffic along the Champs-Élysées. Paris looked eternal outside the tinted windows, beautiful in the way only Paris could be. But Alex barely noticed any of it. Her hands rested in her lap, trembling slightly. Across from her sat a silent presidential aide who offered no explanation beyond the words already spoken downstairs at the hotel. "The president is waiting." That sentence continued echoing in her head. The president is waiting. For her. A girl who once practiced on public courts under brutal Manila heat. A girl who had spent years dragging heavy tennis bags through airports while wondering if the sacrifices would ever amount to anything. A girl who still called her mother after difficult losses because no matter how famous she became, part of her remained the same nervous child chasing impossible dreams. And now France itself was opening its doors. Outside, rain streaked across the limousine windows. Alex looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Not because she had changed, because the world around her suddenly had. When the limousine passed through the iron gates of the Élysée Palace, she instinctively sat straighter. The palace rose ahead like something from another century, glowing gold beneath the Parisian night sky. Guards stood motionless beneath tall lanterns while fountains shimmered quietly in the courtyard. The scale of it felt unreal. Her life had become unreal. The limousine stopped. A uniformed attendant opened the door immediately. "Bienvenue, Mademoiselle Eala." She stepped out slowly. The cold Paris air brushed against her skin. For one brief second, she almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. 24 hours earlier she had been stretching at practice courts preparing for first-round tennis matches. Now she was standing at the presidential palace of France. The massive wooden doors opened before she even reached them. Inside, marble floors reflected chandelier light in long golden streaks. Alex followed the aide through endless corridors lined with paintings of former French leaders, military victories, and moments that had shaped European history. Yet somehow tonight, despite all that history surrounding her, she could feel history changing again. Because the palace was not preparing for politics tonight. It was preparing for her. When the doors to the Salon de Fêtes opened, Alex froze. The room was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars above an enormous hall filled with gold detailing, frescoed ceilings, and centuries of prestige. But what stunned her most was what the room lacked. No reporters, no photographers, no ministers, no state delegation, only a single table, 2 chairs, and Emmanuel Macron rising to greet her personally. "Alex," he said warmly. His tone immediately dissolved some of her fear. Not formal, not distant, human. "I'm glad you came." She shook his hand carefully. "Mr. President, thank you for inviting me. The pleasure is mine." He gestured toward the table. "Please sit." Dinner began simply. Water poured softly into crystal glasses. Silverware glimmered beneath candlelight. Outside the tall palace windows, Paris stretched endlessly into the night. For the first few minutes, Alex barely touched her food. Her heart was still racing. Macron noticed immediately. "You seem nervous," he said with a small smile. She laughed softly. "I think most people would be nervous having dinner with the President of France." "Perhaps," he replied. "But most people are not carrying millions of hearts with them the way you are. That sentence caught her off guard. Macron leaned back slightly, studying her carefully. You know, he continued, politicians spend entire careers trying to inspire people. Most fail. Athletes sometimes do it without even trying. Alex lowered her eyes. I'm just playing tennis. No, Macron said gently. You stopped being just a tennis player a long time ago. Silence settled briefly between them. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. Then the president began asking about her childhood. Not the polished media version. The real version. What Manila felt like during rainy season. How lonely Mallorca had been during her first months away from home. Whether she had ever considered quitting. Whether she missed ordinary life. The questions surprised her because they were personal in ways interviews never were. And gradually, without realizing it, she began answering honestly. She told him about crying in dorm rooms at the Rafa Nadal Academy because she missed Filipino food. About practicing through injuries because her family had sacrificed too much for her to stop. About feeling pressure every time she saw overseas Filipino workers spending hard-earned money just to watch her play. At one point, Macron simply listened quietly while she spoke. Not interrupting. Not redirecting. Just listening. And Alex realized something important. This dinner was not publicity. Meant something. Then Macron said the words that changed everything. I watched your match in Rome. Alex blinked. You watched? Of course. He smiled slightly. You expected the president of France not to watch the most talked about athlete entering Roland Garros? She laughed nervously. But Macron's expression soon turned serious again. It wasn't the tennis that fascinated me most, he admitted. It was the crowd. Alex became still. The flags, Macron continued softly. The emotion. Chants. Tears. The way your people look at you. He paused. I've spent decades studying movements. Political movements. Social movements. Cultural movements. What follows you feels larger than sports. Alex did not know how to answer. Because deep down she had started feeling it too. The airports. The crowds. The endless flags. The strangers crying during her matches. Sometimes it frightened her. Sometimes it overwhelmed her. Sometimes she worried she would fail everyone who believed in her. Macron seemed to sense that fear immediately. You are wondering if you deserve it, he said. Alex looked up sharply. How did you know? Because every person who truly deserves influence asks themselves that question. The room fell silent again. Then slowly, carefully, Macron reached into his suit jacket and removed a thin navy blue folder embossed with the seal of the French Republic. He placed it gently on the table between them. This, he said quietly, is the real reason I invited you here tonight. Alex stared at the folder. Her pulse quickened. Macron slid it toward her. Open it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the cover. The first page displayed official French government letterhead. The second page contained something she never could have imagined reading. Proposal. A fully funded Franco-Philippine athletic and educational exchange initiative designed specifically for young Filipino athletes. Scholarships, training programs, French academy placements, housing assistance, academic opportunities, mentorship structures, everything. Alex's eyes moved down the page until they reached the proposed name of the initiative, the Alex Eala Scholarship Program. Her breath caught instantly. No, she whispered. Macron watched her reaction carefully. Yes. She looked up at him, speechless. This can't be real. It is very real. But why me? Macron answered immediately. Because names matter. Alex looked back down at the pages. Thousands of possibilities suddenly exploded inside her mind. Young athletes from Manila, Umbu, Devo, children training in France because of something attached to her name. Felt impossible. Too large. Too heavy. I don't understand, she admitted quietly. Why would France do this? Macron folded his hands calmly. Because your story matters to people here too. He explained how France's Filipino community had grown over the years. Nurses, caregivers, hospital workers, engineers, domestic workers, students, families who had spent decades building lives far from home while often remaining invisible to the societies around them. And then you arrived, Macron said. The moment you started winning, they became visible to each other again. Alex swallowed hard. Macron continued. You gave them gathering points, pride, celebration, identity. You made people who felt forgotten suddenly feel represented. He leaned slightly forward. That is powerful. Alex's eyes were beginning to glisten now. I never wanted fame, she admitted. I know. I never wanted to become some kind of symbol. The world chooses symbols for itself, Macron replied softly. That part is never voluntary. The chandeliers flickered gently overhead. Outside, Paris rain continued tapping softly against palace windows. Inside, the future was quietly rearranging itself. What happens if I say no? Alex finally asked. Macron smiled. Then I will still respect you enormously. He paused. But I hope you won't. Why? Because I think you understand something most famous people never do. And what's that? That influence only matters if you use it to open doors for others. The words settled deep inside her. For several moments she said nothing. Then quietly, I'm scared. Macron nodded immediately. Good. She blinked. Good. People who are not afraid of responsibility usually should not have it. That made her laugh through tears she hadn't realized were forming. Dinner continued afterward, but the atmosphere changed completely. Became lighter, warmer, more human. They discussed Rafael Nadal, French cuisine, travel exhaustion, the emotional loneliness of public life. Macron even joked about his own disastrous attempts at tennis. You move better than most politicians, Alex teased. That is an extremely low standard. For the first time that night, she relaxed completely. Hours passed almost unnoticed. At nearly 2 a.m, Macron finally stood. You should sleep, he said. You have a tournament to win. Alex carefully closed the folder. The weight of it felt enormous in her hands. As they walked through the palace corridors together, presidential staff quietly stepped aside. Some stared curiously. Others smiled politely. One elderly attendant placed his hand over his heart as she passed. Alex noticed. So did Macron. You see, he said softly. People believe in you. Outside, the limousine waited once more. Before she stepped inside, Macron stopped her gently. One last thing. He turned. When you walk onto Court Philippe Chatrier tomorrow, remember something important. What? You already succeeded. Alex looked at him silently. The world spends too much time measuring trophies, Macron continued. But impact cannot always be counted that way. Then he smiled. And besides, I have a feeling Paris is going to fall in love with you. The limousine doors closed. As the car pulled away from the Élysée Palace, Alex looked back through the rear window. Macron remained standing beneath the palace lights, watching the car disappear into the Paris night. Only then did the full emotional weight of the evening finally hit her. She covered her face with her hands and cried. Not graceful tears, not controlled tears, real tears. The kind that come when your life suddenly becomes too large to process. The Eiffel Tower sparkled in the distance as Paris slid silently past the windows. Alex thought about the little girl she once was. The girl hitting forehands under brutal heat while dreaming impossible dreams. What would that little girl think now? Presidential scholarship program. Her name attached to opportunity. Her story becoming something bigger than herself. By the time the limousine returned to the Hotel de Crillon, she felt emotionally exhausted in an entirely different way. The concierge immediately opened the door for her. Good evening, mademoiselle. She nodded absently and stepped into the elevator, clutching the folder tightly against her chest. When she reached her floor, her mother's door was already slightly open. Alex Eala was waiting. The moment Alex stepped inside, her mother knew something extraordinary had happened. "What is it?" Riza asked immediately. Alex tried speaking. Couldn't. Instead, she crossed the room and hugged her mother tightly. "He offered me something," she whispered. Riza held her carefully. "What kind of something?" Alex stepped back slowly and handed her the folder. Riza opened it and froze. Her eyes widened further with every page. By the time she reached the program title, tears had already begun falling down her face. "Oh my God!" Alex nodded silently. "The President of France wants scholarships for Filipino athletes," she whispered. Riza looked stunned. "In your name?" Alex nodded again. Mother and daughter simply stared at each other for several seconds, neither fully understanding how reality had become this surreal. Then Riza asked softly, "What are you going to do?" Alex looked toward the hotel window overlooking Paris. Far away, beyond the glowing city lights, stood Roland Garros. The tournament she had spent years dreaming about. The tournament she was supposed to focus on. But suddenly tennis no longer felt like the only thing waiting for her. She thought about overseas Filipino workers, about children watching from home, about sacrifice, about opportunity, about responsibility. And finally she answered, "Yes." Riza blinked. "You're sure?" Alex wiped tears from her eyes slowly. "Yes," she whispered again. "Not because of me." "Then why?" Alex looked down at the folder one last time. "For every Filipino kid who thinks dreams like this belong to somebody else." Outside, Paris slept beneath the quiet glow of early morning. Inside the hotel room, history had already begun moving in a completely different direction. And somewhere beyond the city skyline, the red clay of Roland Garros waited patiently for the arrival of the girl who no longer carried only a tennis racket. Now she carried something far heavier. Oh,